Hello, everybody. Welcome to the SoxProspects.com podcast. It's episode number 225 of the web's number one source for information on the Boston Red Sox farm system from top to bottom, from Fort Myers to Worcester, across the Pike to Fenway, and all stops in between. Thank you for listening. My name is Chris Hatfield. I am the executive editor of Sox Prospects, and I am going to be joined eventually, not quite yet, by our director of scouting, Ian Kundle. We have a special episode for you all today. We are joined for a tremendous interview by Red Sox Director of Amateur Scouting, Paul Toboni. We've been trying to get Paul on the show for a minute to talk draft, and we were able to talk to him. It was actually a couple weeks back, but we wanted to make sure last episode we got Ian's reports from Greenville out in a timely manner, and we figured we would get Paul on this episode. I guess it's a milestone episode every 25, I guess. I don't know. But at any rate, we had a tremendous conversation with him, and we can't wait for you all to hear it. A few things, of course, up front. Well, let me get to the standard introductory stuff. Of course, we want to thank you all who support us on patreon.com/SoxProspects. And if you want to support the show, you can support us there. Get access to neat perks like the Patreon game updates we just posted for the first time for $1 and up, I believe, patrons. Our prospects ranked 61 to 70 in our internal voting process. So those are up there. And for folks at the $5 level and up, they have access to, I believe we did the top 20 or 30 of the four brass members. That'd be myself, Ian, Mike Andrews, and James Dunn, our personal rankings from the voting. So, and of course, those $5 level and up Patreon supporters are Kyle Costigan, Tyler Woodrow, Jeff Trainer, David Nardone, Tim Harding, Bill Stanton, Deb Kendall, Evan Kirkwood, Hurricanes 1, Chris Fox, James O'Hara, Nathan Kenyon, Andrew Wallen, David B., Ben Burnett, Al Mendel, Kevin Catrides, Ben NRI, Paul Denyer, Lendl Martin, Cassandra Bukta, James P. McMahon, Stephen Gregory, James Bailey, Andreas Goldstrand, Corey Perrick, Forrest Perkins, Mark Herman, Aaron Meta, Jeff Harwood, Jimmy Mountain, Brian Cowan, Dusty G., Pavel, Jordan Shabbat, Jeffrey Scruggs, Nicholas Staropoli, Bob Introne, Mike Kawano, Chris Bollier, Curtis Waltman, Michael Stewart, and Keith Fox. Thank you all for your support. And of course, if you want to email the show, we're not going to do emails on this episode, but we'll do them on the next one. Email your comments, questions, thoughts, concerns, anything to podcast@soxprospects.com. Email's the best way to get us to talk about what you want to hear about on the show. Twitter, our mentions can sometimes be a mess. We don't always get to them. And, info at Sox Prospects is different. Podcast@soxprospects.com. So make sure you send us your emails there. Great talk, great interview with Paul Toboni. Hit on a lot of different stuff. Hit on the scouting process. How does the team go about its process? What does process mean in a scouting term? I kind of jokingly refer to capital P process versus lowercase p process. But when Paul mentioned a bunch of times during interviews leading up to the draft, building process on a player, what does that mean? How does it work? How does the timing work? How do they get their eyes on guys? How do they build their draft board? Was kind of an interesting conversation. And of course, we talked about, the guys you all want to hear about. Nick Yorke, who of course is raking right now, is our player of the month for August. We talk about Marcelo Meyer. We talk about, Paul working his way up. I hadn't realized until doing prep for this episode just how quickly Paul has risen to the areas to the amateur scouting director, position. He's not a guy that's been with the team for 15, 20 years. He spent 1 year as an area scout, moved into a assistant director of amateur scouting, and then moved up into that amateur scouting director role. Has risen very quickly through the system and has obviously been doing a great job. I mean, that Yorke pick, my goodness, right now that looks like a heck of a pick, right? So, just a tremendous job there so far in a couple of years, with a great team that's mostly stayed together. And I wanted to mention a few things that get referenced during the interview so that everyone's on the same page. Some things that he talks about in the episode. First, he mentions the Altabellis. JJ Altabelli is a scout with the Red Sox. Obviously, he has an area in California that he covers. I believe he was the signing scout. He was the signing scout, actually, I think for Jeremy Wu Yelland last year. And, or is he Florida? No, he's California. Sorry. Of course he is. And this year was the signing scout, I believe, for Marcelo Meyer. God, I did it again. Dollar in the cookie jar. So Altobelli, you may remember his father, sister, and I believe stepmother were in the helicopter crash that killed Kobe Bryant. JJ's sister was teammates with Kobe Bryant's daughter, and so like I said, his father, stepmother, and sister were in the helicopter for that tragedy, and that's what Paul will reference during the episode or during the interview. A couple of the names you'll hear: Josh Labandera is a Red Sox Northern California scout. He'll mention that he went to college with Nick Yorke's mom, which is part of how Nick Yorke first got on the Red Sox radar. They went to college at Fresno State together. Tom Kochman is, of course, longtime baseball guy, spent 30 years in the Angels system. His son is Casey Kochman. He currently holds a position of Florida crosschecker with the Red Sox. He used to be the Gulf Coast League manager. He does not hold that position anymore, I don't believe. Greg Morehart, another name you'll hear. He's a scout, an amateur scout with the Red Sox. Fred Peterson, who's a national scouting supervisor, one of a couple guys who hold that position with the Red Sox. And Dan Madsen was also a former national scouting supervisor with the Red Sox. He's not in the media guide this year, so I don't believe he's still with the team. But don't quote me on that. He's just not in the media guide as far as I can tell from a quick search. So, but again, those were the names I wanted to make sure we're throwing out there for you all. And of course, Mike Rickard, another name that I bring up. We had Mike Rickard on a past episode of the podcast, and I'm going to make an attempt to bring that up here real quick. But honestly, that's probably a good lead-in. If you didn't listen to that episode with Mike Rickard, I would highly suggest you listen to that too, because Rickard, who is the guy who held this position of amateur scouting director with the Red Sox before Paul. He's now a VP of scouting, so he's still with the organization. But he was our guest on episode number 164 back in August 27th of 2019. So he came on after the 2019 draft to talk about, I believe he had run 4 drafts at that point, maybe 5, but I think it was 4. Again, still with the organization, great guy. But I would highly suggest checking that episode out. Our page here says he was also on episode 152 on February the 7th. I don't know that that's correct, but yeah, let me see here. Yeah, all right. I guess he was on episode number 152 as well. I didn't realize that we'd had Mike on twice. So learn something new every day, I guess. Yep, and he was on both of those episodes. So I would highly suggest checking both of those episodes out if you haven't, either before or after listening to our interview with Paul. So yeah, make sure you check that out. We're going to leave this episode for this interview because it's about an hour long. It's plenty long, and we'll be back next week to talk about, I guess maybe not what's going on in Boston. The fact that the Red Sox are continuing to stay afloat with their COVID-19 issues is kind of unbelievable. They got Kike Hernandez and Danny Santana back tonight, although getting absolutely bodied by the Rays right now as I record this. So we won't talk about that, but in the system, some interesting stuff going on. Which teams are in the playoff hunt? We'll talk about next episode probably. Might have some news on who's going to the Arizona Fall League. That should be coming out relatively soon. So, hopefully some news to talk about there. Trying to see if there's any transaction news I should mention. It's been kind of a slow week. I should mention we're continuing to roll out our site upgrade on SoxProspects.com. So make sure y'all are checking that out. Seeing what we've changed on the site. Yeah, we recorded on the 2nd last week. I'm trying to see. Not really. Brandon Bonassi got promoted from the Florida Complex League to Salem. I think the shortstop everyone was thinking might get promoted was Marcelo Meyer, but Bonassi makes some sense. Been in the system longer. Wasn't performing quite as well as Meyer, but it was performing well enough that getting the move up did make some sense. So he moved up from Florida to Salem. And of course, the Jay Groom promotion we talked about last time became official. Matt Kent moved up from Portland to Worcester, where he'd been already. The Red Sox claimed Jeff Hartlieb off waivers from the New York Mets. He's a 27-year-old right-hander who had kind of gotten bodied in the majors, but had pretty good AAA stats. As a future, just a middle relief depth. And of course, Cutter Crawford made his MLB debut. I want to talk about that with Ian on the next episode. We'll talk about Crawford making his debut. I have a feeling we'll see Connor Seabold in that slot next time around. Crawford got sent back to the minors after that one start. Seabold had pitched the night before, which is why he wasn't available last minute to fill in for Nick Pivetta when Pivetta went on the COVID-19 IL, with the news today that Pivetta has in fact tested positive for COVID-19. I would expect that Seabold will be the one to come up for the next start. So we'll see if Seabold makes his Major League debut next time. I would hope it's him and not Brad Peacock again, although who knows, maybe it'll be Peacock again. He's still on the Major League roster. And of course, Jose Iglesias is back. I say it's been quiet. It most certainly has not been quiet. Jose Iglesias signed after being released by the Angels. Good to see him back. Definitely a different player. Not nearly as good defensively this season as he had been, although he said today, I don't know what to make of it. I don't want to take the quote out of context, but something effective, being in a pennant chase will help him focus more or something to that effect. He said he's still confident in his defense. We'll see. He's certainly got it in him to continue making those highlight reel plays. You know, Ian talked about on a recent episode the fact that Jose Iglesias had made a terrific highlight reel play recently, but he also wasn't hitting. So we'll see what happens there. With Iglesias, we'll have a little bit more of a sample size to talk about when Ian and I are back on the horse next episode. But without further ado, I guess I will throw to our interview with Paul Toboni. Want to thank all of you for listening. Follow us on Twitter at Sox Prospects for the site. Follow me at SP Chris Hatfield. Follow Ian at Ian Cundall. That's IANCUNDALL. Follow us there. Again, patreon.com/Sox Prospects to support the show. And thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon. We appreciate it. But without further ado, here is our interview with Red Sox Director of Amateur Scouting, Paul Toboni. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm not going to do an outro after the interview, but we'll be back in your eardrums next week. All right, well, we're now pleased to be joined by Red Sox Director of Amateur Scouting, Paul Toboni. Paul, it's been a pleasure to get to know you via press conferences and you know, the occasional conversation in the past couple of years, but it's a pleasure to have you on the program to get to talk about you, talk about the draft, talk about the draft classes that you've kind of overseen in the past couple of years, not kind of literally, and it's just great to have you on the show. It'll be interesting too because this is the first time I think we've had two different people on the show who've had the same position, because we had obviously Mike Rickard on a couple of years ago in August. Actually, I didn't realize that was an August one too. But again, thank you for joining, and you know, thank you for taking the time. We're really excited to talk to you.
Of course, yeah, happy to be on. It seems like you have a great thing going. I'm a huge fan of the site and the podcast and everything, so happy to be a small part of it.
Well, thanks so much. And obviously, the draft was in the mid-July. The signing deadline was right at the end of the month in August. I think it was August the 1st or the 2nd was technically or end of July, but August 1st or 2nd I think was technically the deadline. You, of course, have had nothing to do since then, because next year's draft is next July, right? You're just on a beach sipping Mai Tais and hanging out until, you know, next spring. That's how it works, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm down in the Bahamas right now. No,
kidding.
I'm down in actually Sarasota right now. So there's the 18 and under, the Team USA kids are it's what they call trials. So they're cutting the roster down from 46 to 26 players here in the next couple days. So down here scouting them for the next week or two, and yeah, we're right back on the hamster wheel. Nice.
Well, that's definitely, you know, one of the things that I love having the guy in your position on, because to me, it almost seems like people almost have a better feel, maybe not, for like, who, let me put it this way, for the demographic who listens to the podcast, because we're not talking about, you know, necessarily someone who just kind of casually watches games at that point, given who our audience is. But even among our audience, I do think that how amateur scouting and the draft works is generally really misunderstood, or just maybe not understood. So I'm really looking forward to getting into some of that with you, the timeline, how things work, how the team works things, maybe relative to other teams. So we're definitely going to get into all that, but maybe a good way to quickly start here. a little bit is to get into a little bit of your background, and we'll, before we cut to this interview, we'll definitely get into the nuts and bolts. But you're a Bay Area guy. I believe something of a baseball family where your brother, obviously, you played college ball. You're at Cal Berkeley a little bit. Your brother played college ball, and your dad played in the Mets organization. Is that right? At least that's what it says online, which may or may not be true, as I've learned over the years. But I guess baseball, it seems like, baseball to some degree was something that would have been on the table from day one almost. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think it probably dates back even before that. My grandfather, so my father's father, he played for a team called the Mission Reds. I think they were in the PCL at the time. And I think he had a stint with the San Francisco Seals as well. So, I think he was he served as a little bit of a mentor to, the young guys at that time were Joe DiMaggio and Dom DiMaggio. And there's kind of this history of baseball in San Francisco that is, it's fun thinking back on, and not that I was around at the time, but just that, a family member of mine had some role in that. It's kind of cool to think about, but yeah, I don't know if you want me to just run through kind of where I'm from and
sure, by all means,
how I got to where I am. Or
sure, yeah.
So and I'll try and be brief. I don't think I don't think many of your listeners probably really care about this, but you mentioned it. I'm born and raised in San Francisco, and I come from a family of 5 kids and two awesome parents, and really I think probably similar to you two. Like from the time I was young, I was just obsessed about baseball. It's all I really cared about. It for me, it was that in basketball, and outside of my friends and family, that was all I really put thought towards. So a little bit embarrassingly, honestly, like now I obviously have a number of different interests, but back then I don't think I really did. So, I knew I wanted to play one of those 2 sports in college, and in the probably irrational, definitely immature mind of 16-year-old Paul Toboni, what was dictating my decision was, what path lends to the highest likelihood that I can be a pro athlete, right? Pretty ridiculous, right? But I ended up going to Cal, as you mentioned, had 4 great years there. Ended up having 3 hip surgeries while I was there. So the baseball part of it didn't really work out. And as I'm talking, actually, I feel like in a number of these podcast episodes, this is a side note, but you hear these front office people insinuate that they were destined for being a major leaguer if they didn't get hurt. And when in reality, there was very little shot. I'm realizing that's me now. So that's pretty embarrassing.
It's a rite of passage, Paul. It's a rite of passage.
Yeah, I guess so. It's like, Paul, you hit 150 at Cal, man. You had no shot. But anyway, I was playing or rehabbing every summer, so I didn't really have any work experience, outside of working in a restaurant, my first job, whatever it was. So, I enjoyed school. And so I thought going to graduate school after Cal would be a good idea. And, I thought it would be a good opportunity to learn. And it could also afford me a window of time where I could figure out what it was I wanted to do. So I ended up spending 2 years at the University of Notre Dame, then hopped on with the Red Sox in January of 2015, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm. And so you started. You had a year as an intern. You were only a area scout for 1 year. It looks like, and it's kind of I was maybe not surprised by how quick you moved up. I knew it was quick, but certainly it's been you didn't have to put in the 20 years grizzled scout time before becoming an assistant director for 3 years, and now you're in your second year as the director of amateur scouting. Did you foresee it going this quickly, or is it just kind of how it wound up working out that 4.5 years into your time with the Red Sox, you're the amateur scouting director?
No, I think it was like very much chance. And, like I think about back to my internship, 10 months into the internship, that was in 2015. So probably, what was it, October of 2015, we had a change in Texas. And I remember approaching our assistant scouting director at the time, Steve Sanders, and saying like, hey, would you ever consider me for this area scouting position? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And I remember going through the interview process and I ended up being offered that job. And to me, at that point in time, like that was like heaven for me, like being able to go down to live in Dallas and scout players 24/7. I knew I was going to love my time down there because I was crazy passionate about the job. I knew that my wife and I would meet cool people and create, good memories down there. And then we're down there for a year, and Steve ends up hopping over to the Blue Jays as their scouting director. And then I was asked to come back to the front office in the position that Steve vacated. And, what's funny is I think back to that time too, and it wasn't as clear cut a decision for me as you might think, just looking at my resume now. Like I loved my work down there, and I really I was really convicted that if I would have done that for 5-10 years, I would have been really happy, because at the end of the day, like it's what I'm so passionate about is going out and evaluating players and meeting families and meeting people. And so I guess, the rest is history from there. But I think I've kind of approached it where each step along the way, I think you have to ask yourself, if you're really enjoying the job, if you feel empowered to do your job, and if you and your family are happy, then you're probably in a pretty good spot. And I can honestly say that every step along the way, that has been the case. So I've been very, very fortunate.
How many guys in front offices, Paul, have an MBA? Like, what percentage do you think take that route to being in a baseball front office? Because I found that sort of interesting, but at the same time, you could it does kind of make sense to me a little bit intuitively, especially, kind of in a director type front office role.
So Chris, I'm laughing right now because to answer your question, I guess just quickly, I don't know. I don't know if I know there are a couple. I know Scott Harris with the Giants has one. Brian O'Halloran has one, but I'm laughing because you are teeing up Mike Regan. I don't know if you know Mike, but Mike's in our front office right now listening to this podcast. At some point he will be, and he is like salivating on giving BOH and I a bad time, because like his thing is like people that go and get an MBA love talking about quote unquote B school and how cool they are and all this stuff. And, so you just did a solid for Riggs.
Well, I apologize to you. The check better be in the mail from him. And just full disclosure, I mean, I'm a JD interviewing you, and I'm not the one who works in the game, so I'm not. There's definitely no shade being thrown here, by any stretch. But okay, so you're with the club. A couple years back, you get named scouting director, or amateur scouting director. Mike moves up to a position still within the organization. You've got a new, I guess lowercase GM, chief baseball officer comes in Heim. Talking about that transition, and obviously there are certain 2020 things that eventually wind up coming into play, but maybe tabling or maybe not tabling those if that's part of the answer, but just transitioning into this role. What were some of the things you came in with a mind to do? Was it stay the course, keep doing what we're doing? I think we're doing things right. Or there's some things you want to change? And what's it like doing that while also adjusting to having a new guy in charge and just kind of how the new structure was going to work?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And, I think about it more along the lines of like Rick is one of my best friends. And so it's like working together to think through maybe what were some things that we could change right away that could that could put us in a much better spot going forward. But also, like, the Red Sox have been so crazy successful on the amateur side for so many years, and we have so many great people as part of our staff that of whom are also like my really, really, really good friends, right? And so you don't want to come in, be in this position of leadership now, pretend you're someone that you're not, and start rocking the boat when there's probably not much rocking necessary, right? So I think I think back to that year. It was such a weird year for so many different reasons, right? But obviously the transition with Heim, thinking about Heim and how he attacked that first year, right? With Sale getting hurt, the Mookie trade, the pandemic hitting. I'm sure I'm missing about 5 other crazy things that happened.
Alex, not that you want to get into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That, and then also, I guess what I was getting at, and maybe that's a pretty good segue into it, is I think to a lesser degree, it affected us on the amateur side, right? And so, what happened with that whole thing, losing the second round pick, there were a number of things that happened along the way that I think were challenging in the moment, right? Like, the pandemic hits. How do we get our scouts that are so programmed to be at the park every day because it's what they've done for the last 20 years? How do we get them to adapt to how the world is about to change, right? Then we lose our second rounder, right? And it's like that's a huge blow, right? And how do we get through that? And there were a number of other things. The whole situation with Paul Toboni, right? And
right.
There were just a number of moments along the way in that first year where I don't know, you couldn't really prepare for them. But at the same time, I think looking back now, I think each of those moments in very different ways brought everyone on the staff closer, and I think we're in a really good spot heading into this 2022 draft season. Just because I'd be very surprised if there was another amateur scouting staff in Major League Baseball that is as tight knit as we are. So yeah.
Is part of that, and not to kind of skip about 80 steps on my little outline here, but what was part of what would bring you guys together when you're looking from that point to now, getting to have a number 4 pick and getting to pick that high, which obviously you and Heim have, and everyone who's talked about it has repeated it's a wonderful opportunity that we hope to never have again type thing. But especially for working for a team like the Red Sox, it's not, in theory at least, you're not picking that high every year. So is that maybe something that could have played into that, where you have this really exciting opportunity to go get and add a real stud, never mind the one that wound up falling to 4, but could that play into it as well?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe a little bit. I do think though that like so much of what has brought us really close together, and not to make this podcast episode about the amateur scouting staff, how close they are, or all of us are, but I think a lot of what brings not just our group together, but just staffs or groups in other organizations close together as well is stuff that probably happens outside of work, right? Stuff that probably happens that's more personal, and you're asking about each other's families, and I referenced it with JJ, but when something like that happens, like obviously, we would never care or want for something like that to happen, but when something like that happens, there's, I think, this real connection that's made, even between JJ and people on the staff that he wasn't close with before a tragedy like that happens, right? And so there are moments like that along the way, I think, where and I think there's different degrees of this, right? Something as simple as just going out to dinner and having a meal and using food and wine or beers as a vehicle to come closer as a group. Like, that's the stuff that we think about and care about. Is picking number 4, is that going to get everyone excited? It's going to get everyone excited, but I'm not totally sure it's going to bring our group that much closer together than picking 17th or whatever it might be.
Fair point. And I guess maybe before we get too far into, things that have been different the past couple of years, maybe a good place to go now is how it's at least supposed to work. How does it generally work in the draft, scouting, setting the draft board, things like that. And some things that, in our conversations we've talked a little bit about, because this is, don't want to throw this out there like Ian and I know everything about this either. This is educational for us too, to really get to peek behind the curtain a little bit on how it works. So, obviously kind of was joking at the top about how you don't have anything to do right now, but if you were to talk about, and maybe this isn't quite a simple question, but starting with the start, when you look at a given year's draft, at least in a normal draft process, 2020, COVID year accepted, when would you say the process, maybe lowercase p, because we'll talk about that too, starts for scouting a draft year? Obviously there's a little bit of, one of the things that kept coming up with Marcelo Meyer was, he was a guy who did have a teammate who was a first rounder, and obviously when you're scouting his teammate, he is also on the field. It's not like you were ignoring Marcelo Meyer when he's out there looking like a stud shortstop, right? But in a general sense, when would you say that the process starts with, and how does that start? Is that just, area scouts going out and finding guys? Is it the showcase season, which starts the summer before a draft? Where would the start of that kind of timeline be if you were to try and peg it?
Yeah. So if I were to try and peg it, I think officially it would start really the day after the draft. And so typically, once again, in a non-pandemic year, usually an event called Perfect Game National, it's a high school baseball event, starts right when the previous draft ends, the day after. And so typically we're out at that event scouting players, right? As you know, it was before the draft this year. This year was abnormal in that regard. But what happens is we typically follow what we call follow reports coming out of the summer, right? So they're basically short reports where we place players into buckets of priority. So this player is a top 2 round draft. This guy is 3 to 4. This guy's 5 to 7. So on and so forth. And it to me, it's less about being precise, more about starting a process and eventually building it out. So that's when it starts, I guess, officially, like if I were to try and peg it, right? But I think the best area scouts usually have like this deep knowledge of players before that event even starts, right? So, gosh, we're going to make this podcast about JJ, right? But with Marcelo, right? He's Cavaco. He was scouting, right? When what was that? 2019, right? And
yeah,
so
he was in 19.
He saw Marcelo. Yeah, so he saw Marcelo as a sophomore, and he saw him a lot, right? So unofficially, it could date back 2, 3, 4 years. You think about it with Labby and Nick Yorke, right? Like Labby was at Fresno State with Nick's mom, right? And she was a softball player there, and they knew each other then, right? So unofficially, it could date back as far as 20, 30 years, and then obviously knowing of Nick once he's coming through grade school and high school and all that stuff. It's what I've learned is it sounds like we're going to probably talk about process Big P going forward, but some of our best scouts are able to start that process really early, and I think with that history comes less risk in evaluating the player, because you know so much about the player. And so unofficially, it's tough to peg an exact date, but I guess if I were to say one thing about it, it would be the earlier the better.
Well, I guess let's get into that, because you used a term fairly often or I guess a phrase in your kind of pre-draft and post-draft media availability. You use the phrase building process on a player, and I hadn't personally heard that before. And I guess, so when you say that, what does that mean? What is involved in that? Kind of explain what building process is on a guy.
Sure. Yeah. So I used a quick analogy the other day, so I'll use it again. Let's say you go out on a date with someone, right? You spend 10 minutes together with that person, right?
Okay.
Then you have to make a call on whether or not you're going to marry that person, right? 10 minutes. That's all the time you spend with the person,
mm-hmm.
right? Unless you are 100% not attracted to that person, right? It's probably going to be very difficult to make that call after 10 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So now let's consider the alternative, right? You date someone for 2 years. You know everything about the person. You know the family, how the person acts in certain situations, what they like, don't like, etc. Right? After those 2 years, relative to the 10-minute example, right? You can probably say with a much higher degree of certainty, like, hey, this person is the one for the long term, right? But not only that, I think you can probably also predict with a high degree of certainty how that person will act in the marriage, right? What the strengths and weaknesses might be, how they might get along with your family, your friends, etc. Right? So
mm-hmm.
the same applies to scouting baseball players, right? I'll give you a quick example, and maybe this will hammer it home. So, C.J. Abrams. You guys know C.J. Abrams?
I've heard of him. He's
first rounder.
He's pretty good at baseball. Yeah, is what I've heard. Yeah. Yeah. No, of course. Okay. Abrams is a stud. He's like top 10 in the game right now. Shortstop for the Pods. Yep.
Yep. So he was at Blessed Trinity High School in outside of Atlanta, I think in Roswell, Georgia. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We were obviously in love with the things we saw right away. Right. Like, okay, great shortstop, great runner, has feel in the box, all these things. Right. But over the course of 140 plate appearances against premium competition, we're able to kind of zoom out and look at the whole picture and say, like, wow, this cat struck out something like 5% of the time using a wood bat against great competition. We had scouts in the dugout with him at events, coaching him. And we had 140 plate appearances, right? But not only that, it was the sheer number of evaluators on our end that
mm-hmm.
independently had comfort with the player, right? So we had 10 plus evaluators that had a tremendous feel for the prospect
mm-hmm.
and ideally, like, independently felt the same way about the player, right? So that mitigates an incredible amount of risk. In my mind, it sets a floor for his future value, right? Now the alternative to that would be like the high school player that also goes to Blessed Trinity High School in Roswell, Georgia, right? That we had 3 plate appearances with and no more. Don't have any other information that we use as part of the process, right? We can throw in our evaluation on the player, and it might be the same evaluation we throw in on CJ, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's likely significantly more downward mobility in terms of future value because of the inherent risk of the unknown than there would be with this teammate CJ, right? So essentially, the more quote unquote process you have with the player, right, the more comfortable you become with where you're setting the floor, wherever that might be. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So it's almost building in on-field evaluation, I guess kind of off-field, getting an understanding of the player. And I mean, you mentioned when you were an area scout, family too. You're talking to families. You're not just talking to the kid, on the field. And it's just building a familiarity and knowledge of that player. Is that maybe kind of a, big time, knowledge in a very broad sense of like, what can he do on the field? What is he like? Just everything there is to know about a player before you make a decision, such as using a first round pick on a guy, which is not nothing. Is that kind of a fair way to describe it?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly it. You nailed it.
Perfect. So you're spending, to oversimplify, the year run, the day following the previous draft, or if it's 2021, the month prior to the previous draft, up until draft day, or maybe the week before draft day, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you're spending that time. You're getting guys out to see players. You're getting evaluations in. what percentage of that time is just, when you're deciding where cross checkers are going to go, or when you're seeing who you're going to see, or who heck Rick is going to see, or anyone who's kind of in available to kind of build that process on guys. How are those decisions being made? Is it kind of a percentage is going into kind of higher round picks versus later round picks? How are those, who's making the calls on how those resources get distributed and put out there and used? Is that you? Is that a combination of you, Rick, and, a couple other people? Is Heim involved? How does that part of it work?
Yeah. So, maybe it'll be helpful context, like if I just lay out how the department is set up just very briefly, so you can kind of understand what I'm getting at, or at least your listeners. So essentially what we have is we have 17 or 18 area scouts around the country, right? And they're all responsible for these areas that vary in terms of like player density, but also land area, right? So like mentioned JJ. JJ is down in Southern California in one of our smallest areas, right? Because the player density is so big, right? Mm-hmm. But then we also have a scout, Lane Decker, who covers Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, right? He covers all those states, right? And because the density isn't as great, right? And so they're at like the grassroots level, and they're in charge of starting the process on all these players, right? And then that information flows up to our cross-check staff, who we have four personnel scattered around the country, one covering the West Coast, one covering the South, one covering the Midwest, one covering the East. And so that information flows up through them. And then from there, they filter through it, and then it flows up to our national staff, our national cross-check staff. And it's a little bit nuanced here because, our cross-check staff also has national responsibilities, but for the sake of simplicity, the national staff then flows upward through the front office. So in terms of setting coverages, so Devin Pearson, Justin Horowitz, and Jake Brummel out of the front office help with a lot of that. Our cross-checkers help with it. But I also think that, that is one of the great parts of our group. We're not crawling down each other's necks, micromanaging, right?
Right.
Are there times where I call JJ and say, like, hey, keep a special eye out for this kid? Sure, there will. But I and the rest of our staff, very conscious of the fact that JJ is in his position for a reason, right? He does an incredible job. And there's this embedded trust there where we know JJ will be dominating his job, right? And also I think like JJ is probably part of the reason why he enjoys, I'm putting words in his mouth here, but enjoys being part of the Red Sox, right? Like he's typically, when I've gone up to JJ and said like, hey, try and get a look on this kid, he's been on it. I've probably been wrong, and he wouldn't do it because JJ is such a great guy, but somewhere deep down inside, he's probably rolling his eyes a little bit, right? Just because he's, right. I mean, we trust him in his role, and as we do everyone else in their roles, right? So I guess in short, he can kick off the coverage on the players in his area, and then the level of priority he places on the players will ultimately dictate who comes in after JJ.
That makes sense. So you've got guys out there in the field. You're like you said, and it seems like, this is something I mentioned to Rick when we had him on, but the amount year over year that you guys have, I mean, a lot of these names are names that I've seen in that page of the media guide year in and year out. The consistency, and of course you're also bringing in new blood. I mean, heck, the scouts for the first and second rounder this year, and actually come to think of it, the fourth and fifth rounder last year, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. Are newer guys who you brought in. So there's kind of this combination of having some consistency while also adding new blood. It seems like that's a good mix that you guys have and have had going for a while now. Has that been your kind of feel for it as well? And that's kind of helped lead to the success that you guys have had?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that's necessarily by design. I think, the large majority of the time, like, we're trying to do our best to retain all those on staff because everyone's doing such a great job, and I think there's certainly advantages that come to or that come with continuity and just developing trust and an understanding of how our scouts evaluate and that sort of thing. But I think also, when we have brought on new scouts, we've placed a tremendous amount of or great emphasis on helping them develop and getting them up to speed. And that's really important too, because, at some point they're going to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years into their career. And, how good of evaluators they are and how each of them are dominating each of their respective jobs is going to ultimately determine how or play a big part in determining how good of a draft we're going to have in whatever given year. So it's a huge point of emphasis for us.
So your scouts are out there. They're like you say, they're dominating in their areas and their fields that they've got to cover. I think it's about a week before you guys start to get together in Boston and set the draft board. How does that work? I think we've got a lot of, and this is natural and something we kind of joked about the other day, the percentage, I talk about our listenership, the percentage of our listenership that plays some kind of fantasy sport, I'm sure, is probably quite large. I'm guessing, myself and Ian, certainly no exception. How does the draft board get set? How does that process work? I've always kind of found it fascinating. You kind of have everybody gets together and the amount of data that must be processed and put together. Not only the scouts, actually, I should also mention an area of the organization that you always do make it a point to shout out as well when I feed you the softball question to do so after each draft. The analysts as well, the kind of analytical side of the front office plays a little bit into the draft as well. How does all of this data get put together and put into some kind of, is it a 1 to 300 list? Is it a giant chart? I don't know. Does it look like that one, GIF from It's Always Sunny where, the guy's going crazy and mapping something out? What does it look like? How does that process work? How does that all come together in the days leading up to the draft itself?
Yeah. So, I think I know that it starts with a need on our end to know what players are worth given the information we have so we can order them correctly, right? Or maybe better stated, take advantage of risk profiles that aren't abundantly clear to not just the public, but also other major league organizations, right? And being as precise as possible with those valuations as we can, right? So what it essentially becomes about is assigning value in numerical terms, right? So I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds here, but it's not enough. In my mind, it's not enough to know that we have this player ranked 1, this player ranked 2, this player ranked 3, right? We need to have a precise understanding of the difference in value between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and so on and so forth, right? So whatever you call it, doesn't matter what you call it. I think you're best off if you have some variable, right? For the sake of this discussion, we'll just call it, Sox prospect score, right? That sounds fancy, doesn't it?
Sure, yeah.
But we're taking into account all of the information, right? Player A has a score of 100, right? Player B has a score of, let's say, 98.7, right? And player C has a score of 82.5, right? If those players are the top 3 players on the board, in my mind, it's really important to know the difference between 100 and 98.7 and 98.7 and 82.5 and even 100 and 82.5, right? Mm-hmm. And the other important piece, and you hit on it, right? But there is so much information on each player at this point in time. We'll say 10 scouting reports, endless amounts of performance data, et cetera, right? You have to be able to synthesize it and arrive at one single numerical term per player in an effort to simplify your decisions in the moment, right? So let me just highlight this point for a second, because I think it's a really important one. So imagine for a second that we're deciding between Marcelo and another player, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to weigh the value of these 15 reports on both players, right? All the tool grades within those reports, right? all the biographical information, all the performance, all the other pieces of data, right? To be precise, it's just about impossible, right? Now imagine carrying out that process for 1,000 players, right? And ordering them with a high degree of confidence, right? You're talking about like player 233 versus player 234. Like, first of all, why should they be in the same, area on the board? And second of all, why should 233 be above 234, right? That's a super, super challenging proposition, right? Now, in my mind, this wasn't exactly part of the question, but we can talk through our evaluation process till we go right on the face, right? But in my mind, our effectiveness in making good picks will always circle back to the accuracy of the inputs, right?
Sure.
If our scouting reports aren't accurate, more often than not, our picks won't be great, right? If our scouting reports are more often right than wrong, then we're probably going to select some pretty good players, right? So, and then I guess, assuming you really believe in how you're valuing these players, it becomes about doing your best to stay disciplined and raking up as much value as you can and not falling victim to impulsivity in the moment. And then the hope is that over the long term, you're leaving the competition in the dust. So did you follow that?
Yeah.
Okay. I know I threw a lot out there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
I should also say too.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, just the last thing I'll say. The last thing to consider as well is like the game is constantly changing, right? So, and you've heard Chaim say this, but we have to evolve to stay ahead, right? So every year at the time of the draft, our valuation process has changed in some way in an effort to stay ahead of the game, right? We're probably we could be listening to this podcast episode 10 years from now, like laughing at the simplicity of what I'm saying, right? But that's the challenge of it, and that's what kind of makes it fun, or part of the reason what makes it fun. And so anyway, I just jumped around a ton, so hopefully the listeners are able to follow.
Ian, you wanted to hop in with a question?
Yeah, actually, so one question I get a lot, and that has always interested me, is how much input does someone like Chaim have over the draft selection process, especially when it comes into the weeds? Is he actively involved the entire time, or does he more jump in late? Or because I feel like when it comes to draft, a lot of people it's Chaim is the one who ends up and makes the decision. Is that what happens, or is it a collaborative process? How does the actual selection process work, and how involved are guys like him, Brian O'Halloran, and the other, the guys involved with the front office?
Yeah, so my initial reaction to that would be just to say that it's extremely collaborative. So, really dating back to like Chaim's opening press conference, right? Like, I don't think he was joking when he said like he wanted to create something where there was huge collaboration, right? I mean, I guess most easily stated, like I think what Chaim and BOH are really, really good at is they won't necessarily push me like to make a decision one way or the other, but they will ask a ton of really, really good questions that force me and others within the department to really think through why we're valuing players or things in certain ways, right? And so both Chaim and BOH, like they have this combination of obviously being really intelligent, but also like towing the line of being in the weeds, but not too in the weeds, and having like this level of trust, similar to what I just talked about with our cross checkers and area scouts, right? Mm-hmm. And trusting them and not being, crawling down their necks, right? I think same applies to Chaim and BOH and myself and other members of leadership within amateur, right? They'll ask questions, they'll empower us to do our jobs, but they aren't necessarily dictating decisions, right? Or at least haven't to this point. Right. And that is, like, in my mind, I often have to take a step back and empathize with both of those guys, right? Because imagine for a second how difficult it could be in many ways where like Chaim, I'm thinking the 2020 draft, right? Like Chaim comes over from Tampa Bay. He knows us decently well, because of the months leading up to the draft, but he doesn't really have this intimate understanding of who I am or how we operate, right? He hasn't been with us for long enough, right? And to have a level of trust in our process and our personnel to take a player that was ranked, 150th by all the media outlets, that's, you could say it's one of two things. It's not very smart, or it's just him placing a huge level of trust in the group. And I would lean more towards the latter. So incredible people to work for, and maybe more importantly, incredible resources to have as we think through all these really challenging questions that come our way regularly.
I do have a few other, how it works type questions that we'll certainly make sure we get back to and pepper in here. But that does sound like a good spot to transition to the first rounder of your tenure as the director of amateur scouting, and Nick Yorke, who, I tell you what, this is a good time for us to ask you about him. I mean, if you wanted to kind of, step up on the rock and beat your chest a little bit over how that's gone so far. Picking Nick Yorke there last year in the first round at 17th overall. The two the clips I keep thinking back to are there's the one clip of, I don't know if was it Reynolds, Ian, just or someone on the broadcast saying they had no idea who Nick was, and then just the kind of counterbalance that of I think it was Tim Corbin on the broadcast, who said he thought he might have had the best hit tool in the high school class. Making that pick, for us out here in kind of the general population, make it sound like we're all in prison. The general public, maybe it was a bit of a surprise, but to you internally, based on the process you've built on these guys and based on what you know about guys, you talked immediately after the draft about the number of times that you guys saw Nick Yorke, that you had worked him out individually during the off season. Being out in California. Was there any hesitation at all that this isn't a surprise pick to you guys? This isn't like, hey, let's go off the board. This is who we've got here. Let's go for it, more or less, right? Is that more or less how it works there? And, I guess you can transition into the, how that's worked out so far and what we're seeing from Nick and just how much he's excelled.
Yeah. So I think you hit on a number of really important things there. I think the first thing is, I think we all need to stay conscious of the fact that, and I think Nick would be the first person to tell you this, but yeah, he had a good year in A-ball. He's still pretty darn far away, and he still has a lot to prove. And so I know you're obviously joking when you said it, but taking a step back and realizing, man, this guy's, Nick has played well to this point, but at the same time, he's really got to keep the pedal to the metal, and that whole deal going forward, I think is something that all of us have to stay conscious of. But why don't I can just walk through our process of evaluating him, and maybe it'll lend to some good conversation in terms of kind of how, because to me, what this boils down to, we talked about process earlier, right? There's this sliding scale between process, right, and talent, right? And if you have exceptional talent, right, you probably are willing to take on a little bit less process in order to, you'll assume a little bit more risk for the upside that you might be coming on to, right? Sure. Nick was somewhere in the middle. But I'll lay it out, and then you'll probably have a decent feel for what I'm getting at. So, and I'm sure many of these stories have been told, but maybe not. But each year before Area Codes, Area Codes is a high school tournament in Southern California every year, where basically the large majority of the top high school players in the country get together on I believe 8 teams, and they play games against each other for 5 straight days. Okay, so you walk out of that event with a really good feel of who the best high school players are in the country, right? And the day leading into it, basically pretty much every year, we get all the scouts together and we ask them to highlight who the players are that they like most on each of their respective teams, right? And Labby's area is usually a fun one for me because being from San Francisco, I'm pretty familiar with the schools and the people out there. And so Labby highlights Nick as one of the names. And I'd heard the name before, but I wanted to press him on the kid because I'm particularly familiar with Nick's high school, and he tells me more, and I could sense that Labby loves this kid, like loves him, right? Next day, batting practice comes around, and Nick goes out like no batting gloves. The way he was wearing his jersey was out of like the 1920s. It was baggy and oversized. It was like those like early 2000s Arizona State uniforms, and then he goes out in BP.
Yes.
And so I love his swing, and we love his swing, right? And you could tell he had a really good feel to position his body and deliver the barrel to all pitch locations, right? And it's BP, it's not the game, right? But it was mostly like just low line drives through the center of the field, right? And then in the last round, and many may have missed this, like it was one swing, but he hit one out to center field at Blair Field, which is where Long Beach State plays, which people don't really do often. Like I remember Cassis doing it. I remember Nolan Gorman doing it, but it's not something you see in every batting practice or really every year at area codes, right? So that kind of stuck in the back of my head, right? And then he goes out in the games, and in probably 8 plate appearances, maybe, he walks 4 times, he hits 3 balls hard, and he probably flies out, right? Swung and missed maybe once, didn't expand the zone at all. And you could just tell the way he was taking pitches, like he was really seeing it early, right? But it also wasn't such an obviously good performance that you couldn't not notice it, right? It wasn't like he was hitting a bunch of home runs in the game, right? Then I guess to take it a step further, when you walk into I'm going to transition a little bit here, but when you walk in your living room and you see your dog or like one of your good friends on the couch and you're like, wow, that dog or my buddy or whoever looks ridiculously comfortable sitting on the couch right there. I joke about it you're going to wonder where I'm going with this, but I joke about it with Tom Kochman. Like when Koch is on the field, I'm like, dude, you look like incredibly comfortable right now, right? I said the same thing to Greg Morehart on the field the other day, but like this is going to sound so cheesy, but Nick's couch is the batter's box, right? It was like evident to me that when he was in the batter's box, there was no anxiety, like no panic. It was like lying on the couch at home for a normal person, right? So now we're starting to think through all this, right? We're putting it together. So excellent endorsement from Labby, great swing. Saw him go out to center field in batting practice. Excellent, albeit unsexy at bats, right? Loved his on-field makeup. So area codes ends, and I'm like, a number of us are like, wow, we love this cat, right? But we still don't have a great process with him because he's hardly played in anything. He had the shoulder injury, didn't play for Team USA. And so we really needed to ramp it up and ramp it up quickly, right? So Labby continues to keep tabs, and I'm calling Labby every couple of weeks, and he's relaying that Nick is finding the barrel like 3 or 4 times in every game he has, right? So in October, I fly out to San Jose. I think it was October. Either late October, early November, fly out to San Jose, meet Labby and our national cross-checker, Dan Madsen, who was our West Coast guy at the time. And on this day, he probably has 10 or 12 plate appearances against the 2 best arms on his high school team, goes deep a couple times, more hard contact. And so now we're starting to build out some of this process of what I was talking about before, right? And through this, I'm starting to get more information from people who know the kid well. And so I'm good friends with the high school coach. I'm close with the athletic director at the school. And this is serendipitous in many ways, but one of my great friends in college, Coach Nick and his buddies in football, right? So you start to hear these stories and you're like, 2 things stuck out to me. One, the tone of these stories is remarkably consistent. And then 2, you're like, wait, is this stuff real, right? And what I'm getting at is it was evident to me there was this combination of crazy passion for baseball, right? And to be great at it, right? Coupled with excellent competitiveness, also combined with great maturity and leadership traits, right? So I'll give you some examples. So time he was like 5 years old. I think I mentioned this on one of the press conference calls, but he'd be dragging his brothers to the park to take batting practice, on a grass field with no fence all day until his mom helped build a cage in their backyard and they started taking BP in the backyard, right? I heard a story from the athletic director where Nick would hold up a ground ball line for like 10 minutes, and some of his teammates who maybe weren't as crazy about baseball as he was would kind of wonder why, but it was just like this never-ending desire to like get it perfect and be great at it that would just like bother him until he had it perfect, right? And then you start to hear like he started a program for the best athletes at the school to sit with kids at lunch who were having trouble fitting in at Midi, his high school, right? So like there's this incredible maturity and this leadership there and then you see it at the park too, right? There are these small interactions where he would put his arm around some of his lesser teammates and joke, laugh about something in a way that was just very, very genuine, right? So once again, starting to piece all this makeup stuff in now, and I'm just like, all right, this kid's obviously a good player, he's a special kid, but we still need to build out more process, right? And so then in December, I think it was Christmas Eve, I work out he and a kid named Petey Halpin. Petey ended up being a third rounder to Cleveland, I believe. So on that day, it became evident to me that, in my opinion, Nick took the best batting practice of any high school player in the class. He probably took 100 swings, and I would say like 98 or 99 were right on the screws and where he wanted to. Like I would say, hey, Nick, hit one head high through the second baseman, and he'd be like, boom, head high right through the second baseman. Okay, Nick, now loft this ball to left center field over the fence, and you go boom and loft it out to left center field over the fence, right? So now it's hitting me that over the course of all this time, you're putting the pieces together, this kid has elite barrel control and awareness, right? But because of this lack of process in the summer, right, something we really, really prioritized, Nick was one of the first kids I saw in the spring, probably in early February in a couple of inter squads, and same story, right? But now the conversations with the high school coach and the athletic director are more along the lines of like, hey, what scouts were in there yesterday? How about today? And so then we're getting that information, right? And then the first real games of the spring, we had an evaluator at, if not everyone, close to every one of his games, right? So watching Nick continue to hit, basically every game was like 2 for 3 or 3 for 3 with a walk or 2 walks, right? And we're writing down the names of the scouts attending and seeing the trends in title and that sort of thing. And so that was like led into early March. Then boom, the pandemic hits, and we're like, gosh, where do we go from here, right? So we were under the assumption at this point in time that we had our second round pick, right? So we were banking on being able to take Nick in the second. And so we get that news, and that was a dagger, right? So then we've stopped scouting, and the process slowly evolves into how we arrive at the final evaluation on a player that we talked about earlier, right? And when we arrived at the initial stage of our final evaluation, right, Nick was in a place so high, it was like, I remember my feeling at the time, it was like, I'm not sure we have great reason to move him off of that position, but I feel like given all the public rankings and the argument of wisdom of the crowds and all that, we need to dig into this a little bit, right? And as I alluded to earlier, philosophically, there was this debate on process, right? And maybe relative to a player who played in all the events for Team USA, et cetera, the debate is like what I mentioned with CJ Abrams, right? We see the Team USA player for 120 plate appearances over the summer at all the top events against the top competition with video access on pretty much all of it. The question becomes, how much risk are we assuming with Nick that we aren't necessarily assuming on the Team USA player, right? Didn't see Nick against high level competition really at all outside of area codes, right? Not to mention there were probably less than 5 evaluators on staff that had anywhere close to extensive process on Nick, right? Where for the Team USA player or players, it was probably upwards of 10, right? So we're assuming risk there as well. And but then as I mentioned, right, there's this sliding scale between talent and process, and the more talent you believe you're coming onto, in reality, the less process you should need, right? There is some level of talent paired with a less than ideal process that exceeds another player's value when we have really good process on a player, right? So the question becomes, how much do we discount Nick's valuation due to a lack of process? Maybe amplified by the fact that this was, a player that was not viewed very favorably in the industry's eyes, right? And ultimately, it was not enough to move him out of a really great spot on our board. So we were able to take him and then reallocate some money to our third round pick, which obviously ended up being Blaze Jordan, as you know. So I just rambled for probably 10 minutes there, but hopefully that shed some light on the process and how we ultimately ended up selecting him.
That I think that hammered home a lot of what we were talking about. So that that we were kind of discussing before. So having a concrete example does help with that. And I guess maybe the comparison to make is how does that compare with the process of your first rounder this year, Marcelo Meyer, who I actually said this on the podcast, Paul, the media availability the night you made that first round pick this year, you looked a little bit like a kid on Christmas morning. If we're this is the analogy podcast. You had a grin on your face the entire interview, with the fact that you were able to lock this kid up, or not lock him up yet, I guess, to bring him into the organization potentially at that point. How does the process differ on Meyer, and maybe what do you as you're scouting him, as you're kind of looking at him, what are you seeing in him as you're kind of leading up to being able to select him and get him into the organization? Certainly a different kind of player. They're both infielders. They're both in that high school hitter demo, which maybe we can get to a quick question after that about those. But again, kind of how's the difference of process of what the process looks like leading up to getting him at number 4 overall this year?
Yep. So a little bit different, but also the same in many ways, surprisingly, probably. Like our process with Marcelo was probably closer to Nick, even though Marcelo was this famous name, than it would be like a CJ Abrams, right? Because of the pandemic, like Marcelo wasn't playing for Team USA and hitting 3-hole, right? He didn't play at area codes. He didn't play at East Coast Pro. He didn't play at all these, save for one or two, these huge events over the summer, right? Because he and his family didn't think it was smart to travel in the early stages of the pandemic, right? And so I guess it wouldn't have been the early stages, but later into the pandemic. And so we didn't really have a ton of summer history. What we had was a ton of history from JJ leading into the summer, right? And then we really ramped it up like through the fall and the winter, and then of course in the spring. And so I think a huge advantage we had, and I think I mentioned this on one of the calls, but we have a lot of scouts that live in Southern California, right? And so not just JJ, but Justin Horowitz, Chris Becerra, Paul Fryer, Dan Madsen for a bit, he's now moved, but Todd Gold, Mark Sloss was there. I'm probably missing some, but they were able to see him early and often. And what JJ really did an incredible job on was just he had such a good feel for the player early. It allowed us to really hit the ground running when we started to like really dive in deep, right? And this one was different from Nick in the fact that like we had probably 15 evaluators who had a really good feel of who Marcelo was, just because we had the advantage of having the whole spring, which we obviously didn't have with Nick. So we were able to scout Marcelo. I think the first weekend was in Pima, Arizona, like in maybe February, and then his last games were in June. So for those 4 months, we were at like probably the large majority of his games, right? JJ, I think, saw him 14 or 15 times, right? So I guess what I'm getting at with all that is like the range of outcomes in our mind much more narrow, just because our process was so extensive. Right now, there was still some unknown of not having seen him a ton against like high level competition, but we didn't really have huge concerns that would make us think anything different of the player. And then also similar to Nick and similar to many of the kids I think we've taken, like Marcelo, the person, just kind of pushed it over the top for us. Like he's, everything I talked about in terms of passion to play the game, the competitiveness, the desire to be great, the maturity, the leadership traits. Marcelo is the same exact way. And I'm a firm believer, I think we're all firm believers, that if you can get some of these kids around each other, once they're really able to spend time with each other and grow tight, they're all going to lift each other up. So, it's not every year I think that you have a talent that fits in this area of the draft, that is also a type person that fits in this level of the draft. And this year we actually had, a number of those kids. So we were very fortunate in that regard, and couldn't be more excited to have Marcelo with us. He's just a tremendous player, obviously, but a tremendous kid.
On field wise, Paul, when you're looking at Marcelo, I mean, what is it you think you guys got here? Is this a future, maybe not 5-tool guy, but it seems like major league starting shortstop? Kind of where do you guys kind of grade him out? I'm not necessarily asking you for the numbers, but just in terms of on field, how did you guys see him, and how do you project him going forward?
Yeah, so I think he's we think he's an impact shortstop. Defensively, we think he's got plenty of arm strength. He's got his actions. I don't know if you've seen any highlights of him since he's been down in Fort Myers, but everything just looks right there. Like he plays the game so comfortably, and he's so loose, and everything works so free. He's that part of his game, I think from the get-go, we were really enamored with. And then the hitting element, like he sees the ball really early. He's got this natural feel to, similar to Nick, deliver the barrel to different pitch locations on time and with authority. Like you look at this kid and you're like, gosh, he's never lifted a weight before. But then it's like some of these reports coming out of Fort Myers, it's like every game he's hitting a ball 105 miles per hour, 108, 109. And he's able to do it, I think, just because he creates this really good separation, and his swing works in a way where he's able to accelerate the bat in a way that's just it's abnormal, right? And so then you start to think like, hey, what might come with strength training and conditioning his body and those type things. He's already got like the instincts for the game and that sort of stuff. He'll improve, but that's where his strength lies, in that area. Now developing him physically, I think is and of course the improvements will come with emotional maturity and all that as well. But the strength gains and physically projecting him out 2-3 years from now gets us really, really excited.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right, I know we lose you in about 12 minutes, so we'll kind of go a couple more things we wanted to ask about. First off, I guess. One player that I'm sure everyone listening to this wants us to ask about because he's all, #internet famous. A guy who just moved up to Salem, and Blaze Jordan, getting him in the 3rd round last year. What do you guys see from him? How, again, on field, projecting him going forward, and just kind of, it seems like, again, having talked to you about this, him falling to the 3rd last year really worked out well in a way that you would have hoped, for example, when making the Nick Yorke pick, but maybe weren't necessarily sure on, and like I said, just on field, what do you see from him going forward? In a guy who obviously has tons of pop, but I think everything else, is still part of the development plan with him.
Yeah, so with Blaze, I think, and maybe it was one of the reasons why we were able to select him where we did. I think one of the important things being conscious of when you work in a position like mine is just being cognizant of what it is maybe we aren't great at valuing. or evaluating from a scouting standpoint. And one of those things is age, right? So if Blaze is a year younger than his counterparts in the baseball equivalents of the McDonald's All-American game, and he's striking out a little bit or not putting together great ABs, oftentimes it's really easy to jump off the wagon, right? But if you put yourself in the headspace that, hey, wait a second, what if this kid was playing in this game next year as a normal age high school kid? I think we look at it through a little bit different of a lens, right? And so my guess is that's part of the reason why he fell to where we were, but also part of the reason why we were really excited to take him. Like that really excites us. From an on-field standpoint, we see him as a third baseman that, I think it's been well documented on the internet, but he's got prodigious power and bat speed. I think what people probably don't speak to enough, at least in my mind, is this kid also sees the ball really well, and he's still piecing together an approach and how to progress through his at-bats and that sort of thing. But we think there's a hit tool in there too that it's not just serviceable. We think that it's going to be a real strength to his game, and we see him as a third baseman. So, and then similar to Nick and Marcelo, we see a kid that like really loves it and really wants to be great and has a great head on his shoulders and so it's really exciting, and can't wait to see what's in store for Blaze.
And then, something that I think we definitely at least need to briefly ask you about this year was kind of a unique situation where the club didn't sign its second-round pick in Judd Fabian, a player who I'm sure, and I think I've read this as well, I'm sure it's true, at the start of the process might have been a guy who, in Judd Fabian, who might have been in play for fourth overall when you started this process. He certainly was thought of nationally that way. I'm sure you're limited in what you can say as far as that goes. And of course, we don't want to just, while the organization does get that pick back next year with a compensation pick, we don't want to make light of that in light of the fact that, this is a kid that wants to play pro baseball, of course. Right. But what can you tell us in terms of, going into that pick? Heim has said, I guess, that you guys knew there was a chance he wouldn't sign. I guess what can you tell us in terms of the decision to make that pick, what you guys knew at the time, and kind of the process, the thought process, I guess, to be specific, of going ahead and popping him at 44 overall, and maybe what risks you knew were involved?
Yeah, so I think going into the pick, I think we were very cognizant of the fact that there was some sizable chance that he wasn't going to sign. Now, with that said, our view of the player and the person was so high. We thought so highly of and continue to think so highly of Judd as a player and a person that compared to the other alternative, we thought it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. And, as you referenced, we ended up not signing him, and we'll take the pick next year. I guess in short, the gap in value we saw when we were thinking about selecting Judd and in this spot, it far exceeded the loss in value in our eyes of the time value of the pick, pushing a pick back one spot in 1 year, right? And so I'll leave it at that. I guess the last thing I'll say about this is I hope he goes in the top 10 picks this year. Like, I hope he goes absolutely crazy because, like I said, over the course of the process, and really dating back to high school, we've come to love him as a player and as a kid, and we hope the best for him.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right, I know. One last thing, I know we're about to lose you, but I like to kind of ask this because it generally leads to interesting stuff. But do you have any kind of top of your head best scouting story or story from the road, that comes to mind of, it could be an example of something that you talked about or just kind of, a great story that comes to mind of whether it's from when you were in, the Texas, Louisiana area scouting or in the front office of, getting to see a guy or someone popping up or anything like that comes to mind?
I probably should have prepared better for this one.
I'm kind of putting you on the spot here.
You know what I will say? No, but Chris, you know what I will say? I wish I could have a phone a friend here, right? Because we have like,
okay.
I've obviously been in the game for a little bit, but we have so many scouts on staff that have such extensive experience in the game. Like some of these stories are quite literally unbelievable. Like stuff like you got to have Fred Peterson on, or I think it was actually Freddie and Dan Matson, I believe, at a game in the Alaskan League, like in the early 2000s, where I think they saw an airplane land in the outfield in the middle of the game. Stuff like that, where like I haven't been in the game for long enough to really speak to it, but just like stuff that is so crazy when you're at the ballpark every day for 20 plus years, you see some things, and people like Freddie and Mad Dog and whoever else are probably far more equipped to share some of those stories than I am. So I apologize.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. All right, cool. Well, like I said, we know you've got to get rolling. You've been very generous with your time. We're going to have you on again. There's so much more we want to ask you about, so many other players to ask about. So we'll definitely have to have you on. But thanks again for coming on, and we hope to talk to you again on here before too long, all right?
Of course, yeah. Thanks so much, Chris and Ian, and hope to talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.